Brandon Banks, how did he do it?
It is The Breakdown. Welcome inside the show, everybody. Derek Taylor at DT on SC. I am Marshall Ferguson at TSN_Marsh is where you can find me. We are brought to you, of course, here on Canadian Football Perspective by our friends at Fox 40. Visit fox40shop.com and check out Fox 40's latest innovation, the Fox 40 Tri-Layer Whistle Mask, helping you return to play safely. And, very exciting, Derek, this week, we have a promo code. We have a promo code moving forward with our friends at Fox 40 for 15% off any and all Fox 40 products. You can visit fox40shop.com and enter the code CFP15 and you get 15% off of all the whistles and everything else that they have. But all the whistles, they're all 15% off.
I love it. Well, you know what I've said to you for years, Marshall? If you're going to blow anything, blow a Fox 40.
I wish that
free.
I wish that whistles were more in demand so that we could give them more love, because as soon as they sent the promo code, I said, this is awesome. I'm so glad you guys have done this. I genuinely hope that there are coaches and athletes that are thinking, okay, yeah, I need that for training, or I need it for my team when we get back to the field, or whatever it might be, to try their whistle mask and these things they have going on. And I'm like, but a whistle, it's kind of like a box of Q-tips. You buy one, and if you take care of it, you probably have it for a long time, especially a Fox 40, because they're pretty durable. I know, for example, I have one that was gifted to me by Dave Foxcroft, Ron Foxcroft as well, from, I want to say, 5 years ago. And I've used it a couple of times when I've been out training and doing stuff, but it's still holding on. And I'm like, man, I feel like we got to give more bang for the buck. So please, if you need to buy your whistles, CFP15 to let them know that you are listening to the show, you are enjoying the show, and we will appreciate you being able to do that. All right, today on the show for you here, we have got some headlines to get through before we get into the topic du jour, as we continue to make it up on the fly during the back end, we hope, of a pandemic, in which we can actually get some of these kind of interesting thought experiments off the ground on the way that we are viewing the Canadian Football League in 2021. Let's begin near and dear to you there, DT, and the idea of Brett Boyko going to Saskatchewan after the BC Lions ended up not bringing him back. He goes and he signs on with the Riders. Where do you think he slots in, and what does this mean to their offensive line?
Well, we talked to him this week on the show, and I threw that to Boyko. I said, I mean, do you want to stay outside, or do you be willing to move inside? What are you going to do? Because the Riders have two guys at tackle from 2019 who are pretty good. And Brett kind of danced around a little bit, but eventually said, tackle is the place that I've played, and, I'd like to play there. Sounded like he might be willing to flex, but I mean, that's between him and his coaches. It would just seem to be, one, it's another classic Jeremy O'Day 2021 move of, what we need to do? Have flexibility and where we use our Canadians. And this is yet another spot, right? They could go boundary corner, they could go will linebacker, now they could go left tackle. And we raise the specter of, you know what? Evan Johnson's played some right tackle for Ottawa, so maybe we could go 5 Canadian offensive linemen. Oh, maybe all 5 could be from Saskatchewan. Logan Ferland, Matt Riley. I just get really high-pitched when I get excited about talking about potentially 5 Saskatchewan offensive linemen. Won't happen, but Boyko, I have to suspect, since UNLV, through his days in the NFL, has been left tackle. So you have to feel like that's where he would like to be when he gets into the Riders lineup. If nothing else, a terrific swing piece for the Riders to have on the roster come game day if somebody gets hurt.
Yeah, and it's funny that you talk about the all-Canadian offensive line, because, as you say, not likely to happen, and it's fun to dream and talk about what that would look like and how much people would rally behind that, how much fun you could have with that, calling games for the Riders and coming up with nicknames for them. People would sell T-shirts with the Saskatchewan offensive line. But for me, they have the skill set. Like, it's not that much of a stretch of the imagination, because, as you say, Evan Johnson has that capability. Well, it might not be necessarily his strongest suit, it certainly is what Boyko is comfortable doing. So I think a lot of people, they hear all Canadian offensive line, and you think about some of the names that are out there at offensive tackle, like your Chris Van Zyles of the world, or being able to look at what Stanley Bryan has done over the last while, and you think, well, there's, you can't just replace players like that. Okay, but you don't necessarily have these stud all-star tackles in Saskatchewan. Your offensive line is very solid, but there's not necessarily that world-beating Stanley Bryant type that's there as of right now. And that's why I'm thinking, if somebody rolls an ankle, you could absolutely see that. It's not that much of a stretch of the imagination. And if it happens, Derek Taylor gets full credit.
That would be all right. And the thing we saw with the Riders last year, right, was if they would carry two Americans at tackle, if one of them got hurt, they would have to switch two positions to get a guy in there, right? They would kick Dakota Shepley out to that tackle and bring in, say, Braden Schramm to be the guard. So now you're not only affected at right tackle, you're also affected at right guard. What if you had a guy like Boyko on the roster? And pretend he does, figure out how to play the interior. Brendan Labatt gets hurt. Okay, there's Boyko. Oh, left tackle, Jacoby gets hurt. Boom. Now he's in at left tackle. Oh, right tackle. So he'd be a real good flex piece if he's not in the starting lineup. It'll be interesting to see how it plays out, because the one concern I usually would have is Canadian offensive linemen are very expensive, right? They earn big bucks because they deserve it, because they're valuable pieces. If you have Boyko, and I don't know what their salary numbers are, but if you have him for a little less, if he plays real well, he's going to get expensive, but you have him in a year in which he's presumably not as expensive coming off the BC. It was rough for him in BC. And as he said, I got hurt my third day of training camp and played through it. Okay, I can buy that, because his performance was rough in BC. Yeah. He had, by my count, more pressures allowed per game than any other offensive lineman in the league. And it was tough in his 5 starts.
More than Joel Figueroa, because I thought Figueroa was the weakest part of an extremely weak BC line in 2019.
Yes. Let's just go with yes. BC had a lot of troubles, and one day we should dive into that, because I don't think it was entirely offensive line based. I think there was some offensive play calls that
the structure
helped them.
I mean, it was the run pass splits on first down, second down, and specifically second and long were crazy, where it was so predictable the way that they were calling that offense. It was like first down, okay, let's try to do something efficient or run the ball. Hey, Mike, it's second and long. We paid you a lot of money. Go fix it. And then the D line pins the rear back, and the entire offensive line, not being a great cohesive unit, looked like they weren't even communicating. I mean, there were times where at the line of scrimmage, it just seemed like people were rushing free. I have one clip that I saved on my computer because I couldn't believe it when I was watching back the game. You watch it live, and then you check back afterwards. Actually, there was 2 clips. One of them was the snap coming up and Joel Figueroa not moving for a solid second and a half. And again, I'm not picking on Joel Figueroa. It's just he was a member of that offensive line, which there's no hiding. That was a bad group in 2019. So he was really slow off the ball. And I watched it back like 10 times, and the rusher took a solid step and a half before he ever took his hand off the ground. I'm like, okay, I don't know what that is, but that doesn't look like pro football to me. And the other one was Edmonton disguising a blitz really well against the Lions at BC Place. And you end up having it basically being a 7-man pressure, but it comes from, the Sam loops inside of the end, and you end up there's a twist on the backside, and everybody gets home to Mike Riley at the exact same point. I'll send it out to people. Maybe when they're listening to this coming up on Wednesday morning, I'll just attach that as, a bit of our conversation here on BC, but it was amazing to watch, because everybody gets there as Mike Riley hits his back foot on a shotgun and a quick little rapid fire 1, 2, 3, and he loads the fire. And as soon as he takes the ball off that shoulder plate, all of a sudden it's 7 human beings and about 5 orange jerseys being thrown back into him. So, but Boyko, like you say, he was a part of that. But the thing that jumped out to me, and I did a dive on this on CF Perspective back before we relaunched the whole podcast network, is in the first, I think it was 9 games that I have here of 2019, the BC Lions, again, to frame kind of this conversation, the CFL average for sacks on pass dropbacks is 4.5%. The average for BC in 2019 was 7.4%. So that was on the whole year. In the first 9 games, though, and again, keep in mind the CFL average is 4.5%. The first 9 games, BC was allowing sacks on 9.6% of their snaps. Once they solidified what they were doing with their offensive line in the final 5 games, 6 games of the regular season, they were actually better than the CFL average. They dropped it down to 4.4%. So their number was totally skewed by the fact that the entire first 2/3 of the season, DT, they were just trying to figure it out. They were just on the fly with the injuries and everything else. And Brett, unfortunately, was a part of that.
Yeah, I just look at the numbers. It's a 1.5 higher I have than Toronto was, and Toronto was no beast. Like it was rough, and you could see it watching it, and you wonder, does Mike have anybody to throw to? Why is the ball still there? Why are 7 Edmonton players dancing on his grave? It was it wasn't great. And yeah, unfortunately, Brett got caught up in that. But back home, and he could not have been happier to when he's talking to us about being at home, his dad's favorite team, his uncle's favorite team. And that's one of the things in the CFL that really gets me is Juwan Brescison goes back to Toronto. He talks about being home in Toronto, right? Quebec kids playing in Montreal, Vancouver guys get to go to BC. Like that's something that's really special and really fun to see in our league.
It's never been more regionalized. And I don't have the historical context for this. And you and I are numbers guys, and we don't have the breakdown of percentage of roster from your hometown or from the home province or whatever. But when I look at the league, even since I started covering it, even since I've been around Canadian football as a player dating back over the last decade plus, I have never seen this amount of players that either get drafted by their hometown team, which is the easy cop out for me when I'm doing mock drafts. It's the easiest thing in the world where you're like, you know, I see somebody like a Matthew Betts and a Vincent Desjardins sometimes, and I say, hey, they're just going to go to Montreal. It doesn't happen. They go to Edmonton and Calgary respectively, and I'm shocked by it because I think to myself, how in the hell does Montreal not take one of those guys when they get the opportunity? But when I see players like that going home in free agency, it's not shocking whatsoever. And it's obvious. I've talked to Ryan Dinwiddie about it. He's building the Argos around that. Danny Machoch is building the culture of the Alouettes around the idea of French-speaking Canadians being able to get the best players from the RACQ conference and youth sports and bring them together. So going home is a big theme. But and honestly, the conversation on that, we look at it from a CFL perspective where it's, hey, good for them coming home. I want to look at it almost from a junior football, a developmental perspective, where you have to start thinking, if you're the Saskatchewan Roughriders, and I know they do this, but start investing in football Saskatchewan. If you are the Montreal Alouettes, start investing in the Quebec junior youth program. If you start really investing, this trend is not going to stop anytime soon. And the more you invest, the better coaching you give, the wider range of programs you offer, you're only going to create better and better local talent. And guess what? They're also going to have a relationship with you because you're the one that helped fund their program to get them off the ground and get them that opportunity to advance. Then they're even more likely to come home and want to play for you if they make it into the pro ranks in the CFL. So I think that's got to be a real strategy for all of these CFL teams. Even Hamilton, Toronto, you might say, well, there's a kid from Oakville. Which one does he belong to? Who gives a damn? Start working with all of the junior football programs, the Ontario Football Alliance, and everything else that's happening.
Love it. I love the thought of that. Yeah, for sure.
All right, let's get into another one here. Wade Miller on the COVID testing money. We are tired of talking about COVID and testing and setup and all the rest, but this was a stark reminder that we are very much still looking at a big paywall before we can kick off in 2021.
Yeah, as tired as I am talking about COVID, I don't have to pay for it to get all my players tested repeatedly. When it was on CJOB that Wade had said $1 million per team to test for COVID. $1 million per team. That's the cost of putting on like 3 games. Like that's a huge. That's going to be a fifth of the salary cap. That's an enormous number. And one, you're going to have to pay that, and two, okay, you're going to get tested, but where are you with allowing fans in? So your revenue is not going to be up to snuff. If they had an extra $1 million in expenses, none of the 3 community-owned teams make a profit in 2019. Yeah. So that's a strong amount of money.
My only question on this, I guess, and not that it's going to offset what Wade Miller was talking about, because he clearly knows far better than I do or ever will how the logistics behind the scenes are going and how they're planning out all these contingency plans. But President Biden announces today that the plan was to be able to have the majority, if not all, adult Americans vaccinated by, originally it was July, and now he's saying mid-May, end of May, which, I mean, that's fantastic news. I mean, that I actually turned to my fiance as I was reading that on Twitter, eating my dinner. I said, hey, and I read her the headline, and immediately she goes, that seems like really good news. I'm like, yeah, that seems very positive. Obviously, there's been a lot of downfalls to how the Americans have handled a lot of this, but they're a huge part of the CFL. And I would have to think that if you end up vaccinating the mass majority of Americans, that you're going to be able to open up the border sooner. That means the travel is going to make more sense. That doesn't impact Canada specifically in getting Canadian football fans back into the stands, which is the difficulty still financially to be able to make back all of the efforts to put this season on. But when I saw the headline, I thought to myself, well, if they can do that with that number of people in the United States, I understand the money and everything that goes into this, but Canada can't be that far behind. And if we are, we got some questions to ask ourselves, because if you start seeing America get to that level, if Canada's not far behind, that suggests that we're going to have a fairly regular setup of a regular season, which again, that's wishful thinking, fingers crossed, without any real information. But when I saw that headline stacked against Wade Miller's headline, I really did think to myself, okay, we might be able to offset some of this $1 million per team type of setup, but if we end up having people who are confirmed vaccinated making their way through a border that's actually opening up.
Yeah, the two things that would reduce that sum, right, are fewer tests, which would in this case mean fewer games, or less need for tests, which would be great. I just am at the point in my life where if I trust governments and health authorities to run things smoothly, I'm going to be disappointed. So we talked about the Joe Biden thing, and well, it's all going to be done by this time. Okay,
right.
But bottleneck here, we had to throw at 10,000 doses here because someone turned off a refrigerator. QAnon, the guy with the bullhorns, came in and smashed a bunch of them because he was screaming Bill Gates. I don't know what's going to. I'm always very conservative when it comes to governments and health authorities delivering on target dates, because there's some roads that need fixing in our town, and they were promised a while ago. And oddly enough, it's March 3rd and not fixed yet.
Well, I think they're just waiting until you go through that freeze thaw, and then the roads kind of shake themselves out, and then they go in and they fix them. I think that's always the plan. That's always the municipalities, how they justify it, I would say. But yeah, I took a poli-sci degree at McMaster University, and I'm with you on everything that you
Name
just
dropper.
said. So, well, yeah, poli-sci. Me and Justin Dunk took it. You think they put smart guys through on that? Jeez. All right, next up for you here, Dane Evans and his workout tweet from down in Texas. This made me smile because this felt normal. This is the first time that I have seen something happening in and around the Canadian Football League in the offseason that I genuinely looked at, and I forgot that there was a pandemic happening. And say what you will about players getting together who haven't been together, haven't been quarantining, the fact that Texas is open wide up, and the fact that you've got all these guys from different places and different states that have flown in and they're coming together.
Often COVID right into each other.
I mean, yeah, like that's the obvious thing that we're all, I mean, I'm watching Groundhog Day or movies from the 80s right now, and when people come too close, I'm screaming at my TV. It doesn't matter. It's not something I should be angry at, but that's the reality. Our filter has changed on these things. And so if you put that aside for a second and you just hope that everything was done correctly and that they're all being safe and all the rest, then you look at that picture of, and it's not just because it's the Ticats that I grabbed it, but I do follow Dane Evans because he's Ticats QB. He's a great guy to be able to talk to, and I enjoy being able to interview him and pick his brain on football stuff because he's a super, super smart guy, aside from being a great player. And I see the picture and I see Jeremiah Masoli. I'm like, oh, awesome. Yeah, it totally makes sense. They like each other. They enjoy being able to push each other, and they're going to do that in training camp whenever that kicks off. Then I see Braylon Addison. I'm like, hell yeah, okay. BA's getting his reps. And I talked to Brown a couple of weeks ago, and he was super excited for the year. He just wants to come back to Canada. Then I see Speedy B. I see the MOP, and I'm going, okay, there's some start. But then you got Jalen Acklin in there. You got Hayden Moore, the third string quarterback, was in that picture as well. I believe Jalen Marshall, if I'm not mistaken, was in the front row, and a couple of other different receivers, including David Unger, who's Canadian. That, like, David Unger,
love it.
He caught more passes in that workout than he's going to the whole year, but he was still there. And that to me is amazing. And it's just because of the position he plays, probably going to be primarily a wide side guy. Is he going to play slot and try to replace Luke Tasker and all those reps? I doubt it. I think he's going to kind of take over the Mike Jones role on that wide side and catch 15 to 30 balls max a year. But the idea of those guys coming together and working out, it's very obvious, DT, that they're ramping up. They are full go. They're getting set for what they feel like is going to be a relatively normal season, because otherwise I don't think they're just getting together for the hell of it and throwing balls to each other and flying in from all over the place. This seemed like a work session to me, which I wonder how much of this is happening with other teams and we just don't get the photo evidence.
Yeah, a lot of guys. Dane's a guy who's put out stuff on Twitter before, right? Nick Arbuckle's put his stuff out on Twitter before. Yeah. You feel like it happens. Fajardo had one in his place in Nevada. Jordan Williams-Lambert was one of the guys who was there, and it's encouraging, and everything like that is just a step towards, oh, okay, this is going to happen. They might be super hopeful. Someone, I don't know who's funding that, who got the signing bonus, who's funding the plane tickets and stuff, but every little bit of that, this signing and this picture, they just give me more hope. And whenever it happens, whatever's coming for the season, if it's 18, if it's 16, 14, 12. If it's a 4-game, just sprint to the finish, whatever's coming. It just makes me hopeful for that. And it's neat that that Dane is kind of, I assume, the orchestrator of that when he's
Seemed
not.
like it.
Yeah, when he's probably not the starter in Hamilton. I think that's really cool on his part.
Yeah, and I wonder how much of it had to do with the fact that he probably had access to facilities. His dad's pretty connected down there, Damon, who is a great supporter of the CFL, but also like he was working with North Texas throughout the 2020 college football season, which, man, if you want to talk about a crazy story, look up the stuff that the Athletic wrote on North Texas in their football year, because it was like they went through some stuff that was not just COVID related. It was all over the board on transgressions that their program had to deal with. But to see them going down and working out in Texas and doing that, yeah, I mean, it makes a lot of sense. I mean, Jeremiah probably would have hosted people if he could have, but I don't think everybody wants to fly all the way to California to go ahead and get their work in. And Braylon's relatively local there from the Houston area. So it's nice to see them back out on the field. The one guy who was not in that picture and will no longer be involved in throwing sessions, we do believe, I want to toss in here, Danny O'Brien taking a job with Penn State. I just wanted to congratulate him on that. Former CFL quarterback, of course. He was on the Grey Cup championship winning Ottawa Red Blacks team. I remember one time I had a weird stat in a preseason game where Ottawa was playing against Hamilton. I was calling the game, and I was very early on. I think it might have been 2016 or 17 when I first started calling games. And I was digging through. I'm like, I got to have some good notes on Danny O'Brien. And on his Wikipedia page, there was a note that he had caught a touchdown in a game for Maryland. And the guy that had thrown him the touchdown was a running back who was currently playing on the Ticats. And so they were in the same game in the CFL preseason playing against each other, but one had thrown the other, the running back had thrown the quarterback a touchdown in game. So he had a quirky career. He bounced around. He won a little bit. Unfortunately, the back end of his time was spent with that BC Lions 2019 offensive line that we were already previously detailing and getting dinged whenever Mike Riley was out and trying to kind of hold his own. But he was certainly somebody that could fill at the back end of a roster for you. And you would feel kind of like a Logan Kilgore to me, where you knew if he went in, it wasn't going to be a complete train wreck, and you'd be able to kind of piece together a game plan around him in order to try and get through.
Danny O'Brien, a gambler's favorite in 2019, because Mike Riley broke his wrist, and then they were playing the Riders the next week, and Danny O'Brien was in at quarterback, and they didn't change the passing over/under yardage total from what would be a Mike Riley game to a Danny O'Brien.
Who was asleep at the wheel on that one?
I got on the phone to everybody I knew, right? Because I wouldn't bet a Rider game, but I got on the phone to everybody I knew. I'm like, take the under, because Mike Riley. Full love to Danny O'Brien. He's not throwing for Mike Riley yardage totals, and if he does, it's a miraculous performance. So I made a lot of friends some money that day just by being on the ball, because adjust your lines for backup quarterbacks would be my tip to any sports book. Yikes.
Yeah, whoever was running those lines probably got called into the office when they came in on Monday and said, hey, we took a bath on this one specific thing. Does anybody want to tell me what happened here? And they're like, oh, well, one of the best gunslingers in the CFL broke his wrist, and they put in a guy to throw a bunch of checkdowns. Sorry about that.
And then Grant Kramer came in and he got hurt too. And then
Grant Kramer's story is so sad. It's one of the underrated storylines of 2019. Just like coming in, getting crushed, crying, leaving the field, and I don't know if we'll ever see him again.
We were in the opposite booth, and we were rooting for Grant when he came into that game, and then he got hurt, and it just Luke Mullender in my stomach just kind of fell. You're like, feel for that guy. But then the Riders won, so we felt pretty good.
Was that the game where people were chanting "Let's go Riders" in BC Place?
Oh, it wouldn't surprise me. I don't remember 100%, but there's no shortage of Rider jerseys in just about any stadium, and BC among them for sure.
There was some great social content that came out of that one, if it was. And the last one that we got for you here in the headlines of the week, I just really wanted to give a shout out to Matt Cause, who I think is doing some great stuff on CFL.ca. He wrote an article that was the best backdrops for a CFL game. This, of course, coming out of the Lake Tahoe experience that the National Hockey League did. Thankfully, I don't believe if the CFL went and played somewhere that they'd have to postpone and then kick things off at midnight in order to actually get the event in, which of course they did in the Lake Tahoe experience in the NHL. But he listed some great stuff here, man, like Banff National Park in Alberta, Churchill, Manitoba, Niagara Falls, Sandbanks Provincial Park, well, it's just because Cause is being a wine douche. Inner Harbor, Victoria, BC, Great Slave Lake, Northwest Territories, Twillingate, Newfoundland, Quebec. If you just want to bathe in Canadiana and just think about the CFL playing in cool places, then I suggest you go find this article on CFL.ca by Matt Cause, because I think DT's backyard was on the list somewhere here as well, but
Majestic.
The dogs might have gotten in the way a little bit, so I'm not quite sure.
Oh yeah, Ruby would chase that ball till forever. It'd be amazing. And yeah, check out the article from Matt and follow him on Twitter at Wine Douche.
Yes.
At Wine Douche. I love Cause so much. He thinks differently than everybody else, and it leads to some great written content and a great guest on the radio as well.
One of the first people that I did Ticats pre and post game shows with, they kind of got me into radio by saying, hey, here's Cause, he knows what he's doing, bring Marshall along and help him understand the ropes of how to get in and get out and some of the logistics. And even doing pre and post game shows with him, you would say something and it would mean nothing to you, and then because he's such a trained radio professional, he'd go, wait a minute, hold back for a second here, and then all of a sudden we'd spend a half an hour talking about this one thing that he just absolutely knew how to deep dive in. So great dude, no doubt, and great article there on CFL.ca. Also, I just found out today on CFL.ca that I will be writing between 50 and 55 articles for the rest of the year. So didn't know that was going to be a thing, but we are going to be crushing out some content for you on the written side of things. And I think one of my goals to do, and don't hold me to this because I need to figure out how to do this properly, but I want to go through and do the game tracking that I do for modern CFL games and do it for Grey Cups of the past. I think that'd be a great way to kind of partner with the Marks Grey Cup portal that they have up right now on CFL.ca to bring people, hey, here's how Bo Levi Mitchell's Grey Cup career stacks up against Sam Echeverry's or stacks up against Russ Jackson, to be able to look at the targets and the accuracy. And that's all a bit of an uphill battle to make happen, but I'm trying to do that so I can bring that to you on CFL.ca. And of course, I'll post all that stuff on cfperspective.com as well. All right.
Just make me one promise there, Marshall.
Yeah.
If the numbers reflect poorly on Russ Jackson, you just bury them. You pretend you've never found them. You bury them forever.
I will call Russ, ask for a quote, and then I will get rid of the bad stuff. And then I will say, thank you, sir, for your time. And we will all just write glowing articles about him, because I actually know what's amazing.
Yeah.
DT, and you'll relate to this, because I was going to have you on our CFL Free Agency show before our radio station got shut down. And I had to call you and say, hey, we're not doing a show, so you can just go ahead and do whatever you got to do on your own stuff. I also had Russ Jackson lined up. So Russ, I had called him the day before and said, do you want to come on the show and we can talk about your free agency? Because Russ tells this great story about him actually being up for free agency a couple of times, and the fact that at various points he had really thought that he was going to go to Hamilton. He, again, talking about the regional bias of going home, just like we did with Brett Boyko off the top here. He thought Russ Jackson did that he was going to go to Hamilton, and then he looked at the depth chart, and all of a sudden he was like, maybe my best chance to play quarterback is to stay in Ottawa. And then he becomes the legend of all legends in Ottawa. So I was like, I want you to come on, tell that story, and I also just want people to hear your voice, because people around the CFL love Russ Jackson so much. And so I had to call him right after I called you and said, hey, we're not doing a show today, and I'm sorry. And it was one of the weirdest things I've ever had to do, to call a personal hero of mine and tell him, I think I just lost my job. So anyways, talk to you maybe never. I'm not really sure. It was a strange setup, but he was great about it. He's just like, in typical Russ Jackson fashion, oh, all right, well, have a great day, and just like moved on with his day. And just he's like, well, I guess I have time to go for lunch now. And I'm like, I guess you do. Me too.
Can you take me? I don't have a salary anymore, Russ. Russ, are you there?
It was amazing, man. Let's get into our topic of the week for you. We are going to attempt to fix, tweak, upgrade, theorize about ways to alter a defense for every team in the Canadian Football League. Next week, we'll be doing the headlines, and we'll dive in on the offenses here as well. Maybe we'll take some of your comments as well after this episode. If you want to tweet at us at DT on SC, of course, at TSN_Marsh, and at CF Perspective. But for this week, it's all about the defense. And you pitched this to me, Derek, and I'm wondering where you got this idea from and what you were aiming to get out of this. Because I've come up with a list here that, for me, I found this really, really difficult to do, because I'm primarily an offensive guy. I don't track a ton of stuff defensively like you do, which I respect the hell of the fact that you do that. but being able to come up with tweaks, it was hard for me not to just want to say everybody blitz more, because I always love pressure defenses and I always love forcing the hand of the offense.
Oh, I was thinking you take a body and you put it in a spot and you make that team better. And you just have to kind of pie in the sky it a little bit, right? Well, that guy's already on a team, but man, if he was in this spot, this would be great. And then it just kind of forces you to look at what do they have, where do we think they're going, and what do we think they're missing. And in a lot of cases this season, it's going to be what do they know they're missing because they're not spending to the salary cap, right?
Mm-hmm.
They're intentionally not filling this spot with a more elite player because they want to keep their salaries down a little bit. So I always just like stuff like this because then it makes me go, oh, okay, is BC going to go with both those guys? Are they going All-American at the back six? Because that'd be super cool if they could. Boop, boop, boop. Leads to some interesting discussion about the team. So
yeah, absolutely. So let's begin out west. Let's go west to east on this one if we want to break it down that way. And I'll begin on BC. The one that jumped out to me when I looked at their roster wasn't necessarily grabbing somebody from a different team and bringing them in, but you got Anthony Chiaffi, who I love the way that he played, especially in his early days in Ottawa. Yeah. And he's back with Rick Campbell now and getting an opportunity in that BC Lions defense. And they're going to be looking for an identity, I think, pretty early on. And I think it would be incredible if Anthony Chiaffi became this multiple layered defender who's all over the place, making plays, not even sideline to sideline. I'm talking dropping out in secondary, coming downhill in the run game. I think he can do a lot of everything. I'm actually surprised he didn't stick in the NFL because I thought he was extremely similar to Eric Harris in that sense where you could play him at Sam and you felt like, well, this guy can be a free, or he could be a Will if he beefed up a little bit, or he could play Sam, or he can. I thought that he does a lot of things very well. And so my wish for the fix of the BC Lions and their defense is let your identity go through Anthony Chiaffi. To me, I think that that's the one that jumps out to me is I want to see what he can create if he gets to be a focal point of that defense.
Yeah, he is a really interesting signing for them because they also have Kenny Ladler, and you think, well, if they're going to go Sam, one of those guys, but then they could also go just the way it kind of lays out with how deep they are with quality quality Canadian receivers. They could legit go their entire back six being American. I don't know if that appeals to them, but Gary Peters, Marcus Sayles, you could have Chiaffi at safety, TJ Lee on the field side, and Victor Gamboa got some reps at the field corner in 19. Ladler at Sam, and now you're all American across the back. You're in some degree required, but I think they've set themselves up to go two Canadians at the Mac and the Will spot, right? They took Jordan Williams first overall in 2020, and they have Bola Combo on the roster. Isaiah Guzlik-Messam started a bunch of games for them at the Will in 2019. They could go all back six being American, which would, I mean, Chiaffi and Ladler they're not, I don't know if they're player-wise redundant, but they're both Americans and they both require the Sam spot if you're going to go Canadian at safety. So I feel like they have an opportunity to really flex their muscles in that back six and just cover the bejesus out of everybody. And that could be fascinating. For them, I love their back. I'm very interested with what they're doing at linebacker. To me, they need a stud defensive tackle. Chris Kasher was fantastic with Calgary off that end. J.R. Tavai, nice signing, one they're very high on. But they need Micah Johnson. Yeah. And they had Micah Johnson and they let him go. And however much of that was money-wise, however much of that was, it couldn't be skill-wise because he didn't play for them in 2020 because nobody played in 2020. I look at their depth chart and what they have for other offensive linemen. And once you get past Chris Kasher, J.R. Tavai, and Darius Allen, I have 9 names on here that I don't know who they are. And I would really, man, if this team could pressure through the middle and get some of this work off the edge, and do you ever need to blitz anybody? I mean,
you're not a big Josh Banks guy. You don't know much about
Famba Kamalu. I honestly
Obu Kawachu.
Tim Bonner,
Trayvon Hill.
No. And how many times do we have American into like defensive tackles that we never heard of that all of a sudden, oh my God, this guy's the greatest thing ever. Before we knew who Dylan Nguyen was, he was a no-name who went to Toronto and he played a few games and went, holy crap, This guy's
Well,
phenomenal.
that's Steven
Oh my
Richardson
gosh.
for me in Winnipeg. That's Steven
There you go.
Richardson holds it down, and I think people still have no clue who he is. I think I have to ring a bell every time I mention Steven Richardson. It's my once a week that I get to give him a shout out because I love his game so much, and I feel like he's underappreciated. But I agree with you. There will be somebody that jumps up and that makes those plays. It's the same thing that I felt once you ended up seeing the retirement of Ricky Collins Jr. Just the idea that at some point somebody is going to step up and take those catches, take those targets, get those yards, and somebody new will become what we thought of Ricky Collins Jr. as a 1,000-yard receiver and one of the, just on the outside looking into the top 10 in most of the metrics that I track in terms of the receivers. So I'm super interested in what they're doing.
Micah would be amazing.
Yeah, I agree with you. I'm super interested in what they're doing at linebacker as well in BC. I really do wonder not if that's sustainable. It's obvious they invested in that with Jordan Williams in the draft, but my thinking is that will spot, do you want to stay Canadian there, or do you end up maybe swapping out? I mean, there's a lot of variety in that back end, and I wonder if Chiaffi becomes the key that unlocks some of their more multiple looks again. But at the same time, I might be giving him too much credit. He might not be that guy. He might be a free safety that plays from the numbers to the numbers and dominates the middle of the field underneath 30 yards and comes down and lays the wood in the run game. I don't know necessarily if that affects what they do at linebacker, but that is a strong statement from a team that is trying to build. It feels like a dangerous game. To me, it's very similar to Montreal, where you don't have the strongest linebacking core. Again, this is without us seeing Jordan Williams in a CFL uniform, but you don't have the strongest linebacking core relative to other teams. And you also don't have great defense down the middle. To me, that screams lack of interior pass rush and also giving up yards on the ground. And if that's the fact of how they're going to end up playing, then I think you're going to forget about that back end being talented and covering the entire earth pretty quickly.
If there's one thing I'm okay with being bad at, it's stopping the run. I honestly, someone I was talking to a player and he said our coach doesn't really teach us to defend the run.
Yeah.
I'm like, he what? And at the time, this was years ago, like, really, that seems like this veteran coach is really quite deficient. And now I look at the league that's 70% passing and I go, hey, you know what? I don't care. I honestly don't care, because you're going to force enough 2nd and 9s and 2nd and 8s that if you can cover, like I think BC looks like they can cover, I'm cool with that, because you should pass the ball, you should stop the pass, then you should run the ball, and then you should stop the run. Those should be the order of your priorities in my mind in the CFL. And I'm okay. Can they get to the quarterback, though, will be the thing. That's a good point by you.
Yeah, and I also agree with everything you're saying there, because in the macro of the entire CFL season, you're so right. I mean, passing league, and even if you end up getting chewed up in the run game, like you say, the percentages will work out over time where you will force enough 2nd and 7+ and be able to get off the field because of your great back end. But in the micro, I just think about what the Bombers did to the Ticats in the Grey Cup. And I'm not saying that that's going to flare up on BC in a Grey Cup game like it did for Hamilton, but getting beaten up and pushed around inside in a 1-game sample size when you need it. I mean, once we get to the playoffs and its specific game plans, that's a tough hill to climb for sure.
Winnipeg's a real aberration, though, right? With that offensive line, true aberration in the CFL, and I don't think you try to replicate that. Yeah.
Let's move on to Edmonton here. My wish is a simple one with some extremely Canadian bias for both of the Alberta CFL teams. For Edmonton, find a way to keep Kwaku Boateng and Matthew Betts on the field at the same time. I know that requires you being able to take somebody else off, but Matthew Betts only had 2 sacks in his first year. Kwaku Boateng is one of, if not the highest paid Canadian players and also non-quarterback players in the CFL. And he had 8 sacks and I believe 20 defensive tackles in 2019. I love the idea. It's very similar to the conversation we had about Saskatchewan's all-Canadian offensive line. I love the idea of them being able to play them both, not all the time, but I do feel that they give that type of flexibility. Again, I love the CFL game and how it's structured, TT, where you can bring in some different pass rush packages. And these guys are pretty good at being able to get after it off the edge and also being able to then give yourself ratio flexibility in a pass rush package where maybe you're bringing in an extra American linebacker who has the speed off the edge, maybe a slightly undersized guy for 2nd and long, a different personnel package. I think that Kwaku alongside Matthew Betts gives them some of that flexibility. And I'd love to see just them on the same side of the field even. I mean, you match them up and try to throw them in some different looks where they're stand-up defensive ends, and they can do a lot. I have great respect for those guys from watching them play at Laurier and Laval.
Yeah, the pass rush fan of me doesn't want you to take Sean Lemon off the field, but there'd be
Of course,
something
man.
there that would be really cool to see. Kwaku is I mean, we overuse ratio breaker, but Boateng off a defensive end, I had him at 38 quarterback pressures. That's a really nice number. For that said, will they be as blitz crazy as they were in 2019 will be the thing to see, right? New DC, they were the only team that blitzed more than 50% of the time in 2019. They tried to murder 8 other quarterbacks. It was fun to watch, and not as a quarterback, I know you feel the pain that all the other quarterbacks felt. Looking at this defense, I love so much that Brock Sunderland did in the offseason, right? There were guys who went and got free agents, but Brock said, you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to get free agents off the street. And I never heard anybody apart from me talk about, oh, by the way, they got Jonathan Rose. Do we remember how bleeping good Jonathan Rose is at that boundary corner? And you look at a boundary corner that goes Rose and maybe Eric Grimes, and oh, Jonathan Mincy, is he going to be the other corner, or where will they fit him in? I love Vontae Diggs at the weak side linebacker. I love that front, like you mentioned, with the Canadians, and Jake Ceresna is a real nice one in my books. They need a middle linebacker, and there's one sitting out there in Enoch Mwamba, and I want Enoch Mwamba to go to Edmonton. We talked about this a little bit last week, and I said Calgary, but Calgary's got Corey Greenwood. Send him to Edmonton. That's a tackling machine. He and Vontae Diggs might break the sound barrier ripping after running backs. That'd be incredible.
Brock Sunderland, Noel Thorpe, Jonathan Rose, right? And obviously this is leading to the whole concept of them being Ottawa-based, and it's not a direct comparison, but I would say I remember watching Kevin Glenn, Marcus Thigpen, and a couple of others on that 2017 Riders team go into Ottawa in an East semifinal and just methodically pick apart that defense and force Trevor Harris to throw the ball 60 times. So yeah. I wonder whether or not that group with some more experience and some different flavors added in personnel-wise, like you say up front, Sean Lemon makes a big difference in that because he'll get you pressures and he'll force bad throws all over the place. But I do wonder whether or not that group that they've pieced together with that Ottawa flavor will be enough to get past the Winnipegs and Saskatchewan in the West Division. But yeah, I'm with you, man. The attitude of Brock Sunderland, I always appreciate looking at what he does with personnel movement, even if it's not Red Blacks related, because at some point that well is going to dry up because there'll be enough separation of time where it won't be a direct comparison. But he knows some talent, and he's got some people who very clearly understand how to evaluate and recruit talent. And once we see them hit the field, I think their defense as a unit will be more respected than people are talking about it right now. Because every time we talk Edmonton, we always talk Trevor Harris, Greg Ellingson. Oh, look, they added this piece and that piece, and they're going to end up getting Darrell Walker here for his third tour with Edmonton. And I think we're going to be talking about their defense when we kick off the season.
As much as I was raving about BC in coverage, Rose, Grimes, depth at safety, to the point where I'm trying to figure out where Forrest Hightower fits. And Forrest Hightower is a good CFL player. Mincy, if he wasn't healthy the last time we saw him, that's a real good coverage unit with guys that can get to the quarterback. I'm less concerned about middle linebacker, and I'm less concerned about who they're going to drop down to be the Sam linebacker. Brian Walker has some experience, but I really love, like, when you got 2 starting corners in Mincy and Rose off the street before anybody else started signing free agents. Love it.
Yep, I agree. What do you got for Calgary here? Let's stay in Alberta.
See, Calgary's another one. I was had Danny Austin, the tremendous reporter from the Calgary Sun and Herald, and he actually sort of blew my mind because I look at that front four and I see Folarin Arimolade, a guy who they expected to take over in 19, and then he put himself out for the season in the preseason game against the Riders that year. I said, well, who's going to be opposite him? And he said, I think they might try to go Canadian at defensive end with Isaac Adiyami Berglund and company. That one kind of blew my mind a little bit. Solid through the middle. Jameer Thurman, you can have him when you pry him out of my cold, dead hands. I don't know who's going to play field cornerback for them. Middle linebacker is, again, they're one for me. So I think Calgary, and I swear I'm not being paid by Enoch Mwamba's agent, but I think Calgary and Edmonton need to go to war over Enoch Mwamba. That's the fix. I have a real question mark at the one defensive end. So maybe the next Charleston Hughes, maybe the 27-year-old version of the next Charleston Hughes is what they really need. I'm going to go with that. They need to figure out that one defensive end spot. And if I could move them a stud young defensive end, if I could move them back Jagarrett Davis of 4 years ago, I'm in on this Calgary defense.
Yeah, it's funny about Isaac Adeyemi-Berglund because I watched him through the draft and his tape is pretty special. So I wouldn't be surprised if the way they invested in him in the draft that they do actually believe that he could be that guy for them. Because again, it's one of those things where when you're watching him play, and I think he's playing at Southeastern Louisiana, and he's going up against LSU, and he's getting home on Joe Burrow twice on a team that goes on to win the national championship the following year. You're like, you're starting to look at it and you're going, okay, that's not some walk-on offensive tackle. That's a 5-star freak, 330 pounds that's from the Bayou that's going up against Isaac Adeyemi-Berglund. So I could definitely see him filling that spot. My look is also on the defensive line, and it wasn't necessarily an every down player that I think is going to fill that spot. But Conor Mcguff was a really nice player for Hamilton when he was there, when they decided to use him. He got punched out of the rotation, whether it be through injury. Otherwise, he was primarily a special teamer for a big chunk of his career in Hamilton. But he, to me, is someone who will be, again, super motivated, goes back home, played for the University of Calgary Dinos, Alberta guy. And he also is working in that D line alongside Vincent Desjardins, who I had a scout tell me in the draft back in 2018 or 19, whenever it was. He goes, you give all this praise to Matthew Betts, but if you really watch the Laval game tape, Desjardins is the one that's making all the plays. Like Betts is getting one-on-ones on the edge because Desjardins is holding two dudes, chucking them both, and getting pressures at the same time as Betts is just running around the outside or giving a fancy little spin move. So not that Betts isn't a good player, but Desjardins, in the minds of people who really truly know what they're watching on game film, they know how good he is. And he's working with Derek Wigan, who's an established, solid Canadian on the inside. So a classic Calgary, right? DT, like they've done a great job of being able to build from within. They're developing. And what's to say that the stud star in that group doesn't become Adeyemi-Berglund and he takes over that role?
Yeah, that would be pretty cool. I mean, can they have two Canadians on that defensive line? The thing is, you need the depth, right? And hearing you, I mean, Desjardins and Guff with Wigan, there's one. If you want to go Adeyemi-Berglund, okay, who's his backup becomes the thing, or what's the least complicated way to replace him if he does get injured? That's what it will always come down to. Or if you can figure out how you're starting 1, 2, 3, 4, one middle linebacker, 4 on defense. They could pretty easily start 8 or 9 Canadians if they truly wanted to. Actually, yeah, that might be possible to take him and have an American backup, which that would be, again, would love to see it. Canadians at skill positions, at not the 7 traditional positions, love it.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's something we need more of moving forward here. Let's move on to Saskatchewan. Let's go on to the Riders and take a look at what your fix. I'm intrigued what your fix is. For me, it's a simple one. You already got the dude who I think is going to be the stud of your entire defense. It's Larry Dean. And so my wish is just
Renzo Jerome. Oh, sorry. Larry Dean.
Keep Larry Dean clean. Keep Larry Dean. I've seen it in person. If you keep Larry Dean clean and you let him make plays, that dude will feast. He is motivated, and he is one of the more dynamic players, I think, on all of CFL defenses across the board, all 9 teams. So you keep him clean, whatever the structure needs to be schematically to be able to say, and it's not just beat double teams or sink doubles, or make sure that you're being able to fill the inside and let him shoot B gaps and C gaps and on outside zone get there. I think you just have to find ways to be able to free him up, move him around, maybe play him off the edge a little bit. You're going to drop him out. He's going to make some plays, but his real true strength is when he's sitting at 5 yards from the line of scrimmage, just 2-3 yards behind his defensive tackles, and he is eyeing the backfield. And whether it's spying or running back, understanding where the quarterback's going with his eyes on 2nd and 3 in the shotgun, where he sees a Chris Strevler and he knows this is going to be quarterback draw, how quickly he reacts to that, shoots the gap, gets in, wraps up, makes a great tackle. If you keep him clean and let him make plays, Larry Dean's going to have over 100 tackles. No matter how many games, we could play 4 games, he'll have over 100 tackles. But if we have a regular length season, he's going to be really productive if they can do that.
Yeah, and I mean, Micah Johnson in front of him is going to command double teams. They'll try to double team the nose tackle anyway. So, okay, well, You have those options. So the chances are he's going to be clean. Mac Henry playing that nose in front of him. This is my Mac Henry story. I accidentally parked right behind him one day. I was being a jerk. I was in a rush. I parked right behind him. Mac Henry, I drive an '06 Hyundai. Mac Henry picked it up with his bare hands and then just threw it across the parking lot so he could drive away. He is that strong. And I'm only exaggerating by 4.5% on that because that guy is fantastic. Man, if I am, there's really two question marks I have on the Riders defense, and they're Will linebacker and Sam linebacker. And Lorenzo Jerome is a guy who has started the game in Calgary at Sam linebacker. If you see his CFL headshot, I talked to him on the show. If you see a CFL headshot, you see head, you see traps, and you see neck, and you go, that's a guy who is in the gym. In the gym. So that he's only 5'10", and I think they list him at 205. Like, okay, yeah, I feel like you can run and cover at Sam. So it's weak side linebacker for the Riders, and what you would just wish them, someone of the caliber of a Nate Hawley or Avante Diggs or I can't say Simone Lawrence because of the incident, but you wish them a stud weak side linebacker to fill in for that. I mean, defensive end, they have bodies that can play, and they have some guys from the States that they're looking to take a shot on, guys from like the 2017 NFL draft. But you look at just the list of Canadians or Americans that they're going to consider at that weak side linebacker spot, having that locked down, having your true back five all returning, having a question mark at Sam, a nice Will linebacker to take Cam Judge's spot would be my fix for the Riders.
Yeah, I like that one. Also, hearing Lorenzo Jerome and his actual measurables there on the 5'10", 205 alongside Larry Dean, who is, for a traditional middle linebacker, an undersized guy, even though he doesn't certainly play like it, that could be an interesting storyline to watch for Riders fans as the roster develops and we get to the season. Is, are you going smaller and faster in the linebacking core to try and play with the speed of some of those Western teams when it comes to those crossing routes and trying to switch on those shallow routes? And I think that could be an advantage for them, certainly if they're playing fast with those two guys.
Yeah, let me ask you this, Sam linebacker. Mm-hmm. Should we stop calling it Sam linebacker and just start calling it dime? Yeah,
dime, nickel. I mean, whatever. Honestly, to me, it's not a linebacker, and I don't know why we don't change that verbiage across the board. I think it's old habit. But I think there's a lot of things we've hit the reset button on in the Canadian Football League, whether it be the business of the league, the structure of the league, some of the finance stuff that Renee Ambrosie's been talking about, the scheduling has been overhauled, certainly moving forward. Why not just throw that into the package? Like when we come back in 2021, why don't we all the CFL releases a statement that says, furthermore, we will be designating this. Because I think they even changed it in the voting, did they not, for All-Stars, where they were asking you for a certain amount of linebacker votes, and then the DBs were being included with Sam. Is like that was a land shift by the league itself, the league office, to recognize the difference.
Yeah, you voted for two linebackers. And then I remember the East, I think it was a couple of years ago, the East, the all-star linebacker had started like one game at Sam. And then, because we got it wrong in the voting. But yeah, no, I was running some numbers on it. Will and Mike, those guys are about 50-50 with their tackles versus the run versus the pass. A Sam linebacker on average in 19 made 70% of his tackles against pass plays. It's a coverage spot. So people will yell at me, no, there's three linebackers. No, it's really 4-2-6. We need to stop. We need it dime back. It's just dime back. It's something else, because if I saw Patrick, I've seen Patrick Levels up close at the Grey Cup in 17. And I'm like, oh okay. He's a built dude, but he's small, and he's not linebacker. He's not Derek Moncrief, right? 6'2", 230. He's small. He's defensive back size. He is thick defensive back size. We're just calling it defensive back from now on. You and me. Let's just do it.
Yeah, I'm with you on that. I also, it's funny because I was spoiled when I played at McMaster, because our Sam linebacker at that point felt like a linebacker. It was Nick Shortle, who's still bouncing around the CFL, and he's just this big tape. But the thing is, Nick Shortle's a freak because he feels like a middle linebacker and he runs like a free safety. So we didn't understand what to do with him in practice. And that was where my mentality was, this is a linebacker, because he was such a bully when he got into the run game. And then you end up being able to see the way that it's structured traditionally in the CFL. And you're right, it's a slightly lankier, sometimes less solid cover man who happens to be able to tackle pretty solidly. And that might be discrediting some guys that are there, but that's the stereotype as it lands right now. But in Winnipeg, for me, I didn't have a great one for this because they're so good. So I looked at this, and the only thing I could think of is Richie Hall, please don't allow the Grey Cup hangover on the D-line's dominance. That was all I have for them. Like I couldn't come up with something better than that in terms of the scheme that they are running, the way that they're approaching. Richie Hall is a great fit for that group. Mike O'Shea obviously understands how to be able to work with the linebackers. You see, I think it's really underrated. You see O'Shea on the sidelines talking to Adam Bighill and trying to understand what he's seeing through a player's eyes. There's a great synergy on that sideline, I think, from that group. Up front, the physical traits of the Jeff Coates and the Jeffersons is ridiculous, and Adam Bighill is a playmaker at every single opportunity he gets. So I don't have a real true fix. Is it on the back end for you? Is there something in the secondary that we can look at?
Yeah, I mean, when I look at who they have, you feel like the starters in the back will be whatever Canadian safety, Nick Taylor, Mercy Maston, Brandon Alexander. They have Josh Johnson there. Javonte Dean's a guy who's been around. I honestly just think getting Winston Rose back, whatever futures contract, Winston, just pass that up, come back to the Canadian Football League. Okay, as much as it's for the Bombers, that would hurt me as a Rider guy. But they need nothing in that front four. Every one of those front four, you talk about Steven Richardson. I feel that way about Jake Thomas. Jake Thomas should never leave the CFL. I love that guy. Kyrie Wilson, Adam Bighill, what they'll do at Sam. Hopefully that guy doesn't go AWOL at the end of the season, whatever that is. But maybe just some surety at the boundary corner is what I would look for in Winnipeg, because is it Josh Johnson? Mercy's been inside. Brandon's been inside. That's my biggest one for them, would be a surefire boundary corner, because they're going to get to the quarterback. They're just going to have to be able to cover on the back end as well.
Well, that's the thing too about having Willie Jefferson coming off the edge, is that he narrows your throwing lane so much. Even if you're trying to get the ball out quick, because you're thinking to yourself, well, the boundary corner scared, he's playing off, and Brandon Banks is out there, and we've got so much speed on the edge that we can just flip the ball out. If Willie Jefferson reads your eyes as a quarterback, you catch a shotgun snap and turn to throw a quick game, he can take 2 steps, stick out his arm, and knock the ball down, right? So he completely impacts the way that the passing game happens at all areas of the field, but especially in the quick game, because he's so good. His recognition and knowing when and where to use that body that he's been given is pretty special. So they're a tough one to try and change up or fix, I guess, if the term is that.
Yeah. Someone tried to argue to me that Willie Jefferson setting a CFL record for pass knockdowns wasn't a big deal. I thought, I don't even know what to do with that. This was a smart person telling me it wasn't a big deal, and I thought, it just means he's not getting to the quarterback.
Yeah, that's not his job all the time. He's affecting the game, because last time I checked, you might not drop somebody for a sack and make them play 2nd and 15 if it's a first down snap, or force them off the field on a sack. But when you knock the pass down, I mean, you see how many times, DT, defensive backs, they're late trailing in coverage. There's a bad underthrown ball on a skinny post, and it hits their helmet. They get up and they celebrate like crazy and flex. If those DBs are that excited about having a ball hit them in the helmet when they got beat in coverage, Willie Jefferson's allowed to celebrate the fact that he's knocked down as many passes as a lot of really good defensive backs across an entire season.
Yeah, that was kooky talk for me, and I wish I could pull up the exact numbers, but I can. 14 knockdowns at the line. Yeah, I should add that in here. I feel like he had 36 stops for no gain or a loss in 2019. That would include knockdowns and sacks and tackles for a loss. And the next highest would have been 27 in the CFL. Like, come on. It's awesome. It's not, he didn't have 24 sacks, but let's not pretend those are zero value plays where he didn't try and didn't terrify quarterbacks. Terrified.
By the way, I was trying to distract my son a couple of weeks ago on a Saturday evening. We were making dinner, and he was doing tummy time and rolling around and working on his neck strength and all the rest. And I was trying to find something to get his attention. So I put my computer up on a little table in front of him about 5 feet away, and I just opened up my computer, and the first video file I could find was the 2019 Grey Cup. And so I ended up sitting, I sat there with him for a couple of minutes. I watched the first couple of plays of the first quarter until we could finish making dinner. And as I did, I I whispered under my breath at one point because of what Willie Jefferson did to Riker Matthews several times on back-to-back plays in that first quarter. Just, oh my God. Like, I felt like I had to shut the laptop. I'm like, I'm sorry, Noah, you didn't have to see this.
He's going to learn a lot of curse words that day that mean this guy is really good at his job.
Yeah, no doubt. Speaking of Hamilton, let's go to the East Division here. For me, Sam linebacker is the interesting one, with Rico Murray deciding to hang it up at this point. Obviously, at middle linebacker, we've talked about a little bit last week, but Enoch Mwamba would be an interesting fit for me in that spot. Chris Fry is a Michigan State product that I think is underrated. People don't know a ton about. Javon Santos-Knox comes over. He looks like he'll get an opportunity in the middle. That's the most likely solution. At Sam, they at times have rolled Tunde Adeleke down from free safety into the box. And for me, I don't think that's the full-time solution, but my wish for them to make this defense really dynamic is to find a way to accentuate Tunde Adeleke's skill set, because he does so many things well. It's kind of similar to my Anthony Chaffee take in BC, where the difference here being that the identity of the Ticats defense is never going to be Tunde Adeleke, because you've got so many studs in so many different places around him, from Ted Laurent to Jagarrett Davis to Simone Lawrence to Delvin Breaux. I mean, it's a really, really talented group. But if they need to create a little bit more of that question in quarterbacks' minds to make them try and figure out, okay, where is the free safety? Where is Tunde at all times? Because if they can get him roaming around and dropping into the box and rotating Cariel Brooks the backside half out, or if they can get somebody dropping over the top like a Frankie Williams from the field halfback spot, whatever that might end up looking like, I think that he's the key to really shifting coverages and tilting the defense back and forth.
Yeah, they are rich at defensive back as well. Like I was trying to, just before we started, trying to plot all these guys. Delvin Breaux's the boundary corner, but then Cariel Brooks super deep at safety. Where does Keontae Evans go? Oh, Frankie Williams is there. Oh, by the way, Jamal Roll is still around. So that's just fantastic depth. If you move Adeleke down, just doing this in my head, you're going to start. I assume they're starting 4 Canadians on the offensive line. I assume the center will be Canadian. So that would give them 4 there. You'd have your 7 without any receivers, but then what's the benefit to that when Kalinic comes into the game? Yeah, it's honestly, who is that Sam linebacker? And man, Adeleke is fun. And then, oh, by the way, they still have Courtney Stephen and Mike Daly to be safety. So what the hell doesn't Hamilton have? People think I'm exaggerating. Like I said on the air, had the season gone ahead in 2020, Hamilton was going to be 16-2 because they had all this. They had Rico Murray and they had Patrick Levels and I thought they're going to crush people. And people will argue to me, well, Toronto is really going to challenge them. No, this Hamilton team, if they figure out center, they good. They gonna be real good.
Yeah, I like the way that they have built the depth, and that's a credit, obviously, to Drew Allemang and Sean Burke and the way that they've been able to kind of piece this together, draft free agency, otherwise in the front office. But for me, Tunde, I think is who they want to start at free safety. Mike Daly, I know him; he's a good friend. He would love to be able to play free safety full time and move Tunde down into the box and play that Sam spot, that defensive back 6 DV spot that we're talking about. But when I think the Ticats are their best right now if they use Tunde as the free, but just find creative ways to use him. And I don't know what that is, but I do know Mark Washington is a super smart dude, and Orlando Steinauer is a super smart dude, and they're going to figure out an interesting way to maybe cover up the fact that Rico Murray is no longer there. But I like the way that, I mean, if that's the spot that you're trying to figure out how are they going to use it, and you have that many strengths surrounding that singular spot, albeit Sam's an incredibly difficult and important spot, but if you have that many strengths surrounding it, I think you can cover up for it regardless of who's playing there, even if they're not a longtime veteran or have a ton of experience.
They had a Scrooge McDuckian level vault of defensive backs and then added Keontae Evans. They added Keontae Evans. Hamilton's just going to roll everybody in the East. It's going to be awful.
We'll see. Let's go on to Toronto, who a lot of people think is the primary. This one is philosophical for me. Attack in season the way you have the off season, because they've got so many names. They're going to have to move somebody, as we've talked about. It just doesn't make sense with the money, whether it be having to let a receiver go, a high-priced guy that you just don't think you can keep, or if that means a defensive lineman or maybe a linebacker that end up getting unexpectedly cut because they just don't see it as they go through training camp. Again, a short training camp, so those cuts are going to be crazy. But for me, they've established a mentality right now with Murph working in the front office alongside Pinball and having that MLSE swagger and being able to try and reignite the fan base and the way they're approaching social media. And it's, for me, I really genuinely want to see this team that we all think so highly of in Hamilton have to go toe to toe with Toronto several times a year, where I go into it just not knowing who the better team is. And I think Nick Arbuckle and Eric Rogers and all those guys, we'll get to them next week when we break down the offenses a little bit closer. But on defense, you've got the horses all of a sudden to be aggressive. And I hope that they do that, because on the offensive side, as a total team structure, you're going to have an efficient passing game with Ryan Dinwiddie and Nick Arbuckle. Like, they're going to adapt a lot of what they did successfully when they were in Calgary together. Yeah. So you have the ability to take some risks, because on the other side, you're not dealing with somebody who is going to be Chris Streveler and throw a bunch of bad picks down the middle of the field.
Holding my tongue on the Streveler. I've said many. I've said many Strevlers.
I love him. I love Chris Streveler, but it's that's the reality, is that he at times would throw you out of a game as much as he would run you into it. And as we talked about CFL, that's a great specific positional role to be able to play. But I would take a Nick Arbuckle every down on passing situations over Chris Streveler.
Yeah, adjusted rushing yards. Yeah, I think he was the most effective runner in the CFL in 2019. He was fantastic in that. This is the thing I want to come to with people on Toronto expectations. Hamilton was 15-3 in 2019. Toronto is building from 4-14, and 3 of those wins were against the Ottawa Red Blacks.
Yep. So
they had a long way to build to even come remotely close to Toronto. I like some of the stuff they did, right? They and some of it was what they did in 2020, and they carry over to 2021. They've been buying themselves Canadian talent and Canadian flexibility, much like what Saskatchewan did. So they could conceivably go field corner being Canadian if they want to. Will linebacker will definitely be Canadian, right? It's Cam Judge, Fabian Foote in the middle. Okay. Safety. Okay. I don't know where they're going in the back. So I really want them. Alden Darby is there. Sure. Cresden Butler, CFL veteran. Sure. Then we get to some real question marks as to who are some of these guys that will be in the defensive backfield for Toronto. Shaq Richardson will fill a spot in that back 6. I don't know which one. I haven't penciled in at Sam, but Shaq's a guy who could probably do a lot of things. He could probably be that boundary half if they wanted. He was the Sam for Calgary in 17, so that's why I pencil him in at Sam linebacker. Robertson Daniels, another name that gets thrown around. I need them to have some surety on that back end, so I would bless them with a stud boundary halfback, just someone who is just a monster there, someone in the Ed Gainey 2017 or Aaron Grimes pre-ACL injury. That's what I would do to fix Toronto, and I assume that if they found a way to do that, they would do that too, because they are not afraid of throwing around the cash this offseason. It's been fun to watch.
Yeah, for sure. And I like the look at their defensive backfield, because when you're playing against Hamilton and they're your chief competition, it's the same thing that I used to always see teams in the AFC East doing when it came to Tom Brady, was that the Bills and the Dolphins and the Jets every year would try to load up their pass rush. Why? Because the Giants proved in 2 Super Bowls that if you get pressure with 4, you can beat Tom Brady. Well, in order to win the AFC East, you got to take some wins away from New England. You got to get those wins yourself as well and stack them up, so you directly target the team you're going up against. Toronto, for me, hasn't necessarily built a team as of yet that is a direct competitor and is designed to take down Hamilton. But something you need to have in order to deal with Hamilton is to be able to cover. I mean, they're going to throw so much at you with Tommy Condell in the passing attack, regardless of whether it's Evans or Masoli in there, across the board, from Addison to Banks to Jalen Ackland to Unger to I'm missing names there. Devere Posey signing back in Hamilton. I mean, they've got enough people that if they get on the same page, you're going to have to cover across the board. And that's not an easy fix. That's not a sign one person. But I would like to see them be more aggressive on the back end, because they put all this emphasis on getting after the quarterback. Well, if you throw a tunnel screen and it gets in Brandon Banks' hands, and all of a sudden Brandon Revenberg is leading you down the field in front, I mean, that's the equation that those games have essentially taken over the last couple of years.
Well, and what did Hamilton do so very effectively in 2018 was hey, you know what we're going to do? We're going to go max protect. We're going to run 3 guys, and Jeremiah's going to cut you all in half because good luck covering Brandon Banks and Luke Tasker and whoever the third guy, Jalen Saunders, it would probably was if I go back to the tape. But now that's Braylon Addison, the guy who is the receiver who runs from the running back position more than anybody in the CFL. Good luck with that. Okay, you want to bring 5 defensive ends, Toronto, all of whom are either in the NFL or CFL icons. Cool. This is 7 blockers, and good luck with that because now we can double team multiple guys, and Jeremiah's going to have all day to just crush you. So, yeah, I think coverage is absolutely the way that Toronto needs to go. But now we get to the harder ones. This one's going to tax us, Marshall, as we go as we work our way east.
How many spots you got open on your Monopoly board for the Ottawa Redblacks?
Well, they're all filled, but I don't love who fills them, right? When I look at players from the Ottawa Redblacks that I go, okay, I would absolutely love them on my team. Cleon Lang, again, out of my cold dead hand, you could have Cleon Lang. I'm curious to see what Stephon Charles is in the Canadian Football League because it's been a while since he took some reps. The Averys, okay, I like that fine. Don Unamba, Abdul Kana, yep. Tyndall, Baltimore. Baltimore's a guy who got bounced around in 19. I like my Corey Tyndall. I don't know what to do with Randall Evans and Gump Hayes at cornerback. Are they the way I'm going to go? You and I have talked about Antoine Pruneau and our love for Antoine Pruneau, but he's been around for a while. What do they do there? They just have to get to the quarterback. They absolutely have to get to the quarterback. So I had hoped for their sake that they were in on a guy like Sean Lemon, that they would be in on a guy like Micah Johnson. To me, they need someone else up front with Avery Ellis to get after the quarterback. So if they could have even take a flyer on John Bowman. I don't know if John Bowman wants to come down the 401 like that, but just take a whack at John Bowman, because for me, they're going to need to get after the quarterback first and foremost. And Cleon Lang can do it, but who's going to go with him?
Yeah, it's seeing John Bowman in anything other than an Alouettes jersey is going to be rattling for everybody if it ever does end up happening. But for me, my wish for them is to integrate Adam Auclair, their top draft pick. Out of Laval. If people want to go search out his highlight tape, and he's a lot more than just highlights, but if you search out the highlight tape, Antoine Pruneau, as we said, getting up there a little bit in age, and I'm not trying to push him out the door because I hate when we do that to players who are rightfully training throughout a pandemic and working their backside off to make sure that they're in the best shape of their lives and they feel like they're peaking and all the rest. But the reality is that I think Adam Auclair is the future of that Red Blacks defense. I think that it's close enough to home where maybe he ends up going to Montreal at some point and playing for Denny Machocha as the GM and whoever's coaching there. But I do think that for now, there's a reason why they targeted him. I mocked him on CFL.ca as going to the Red Blacks. And my reason was, why don't you just give Mike Benavides a new toy to play? That was the whole idea.
Yes,
I just said it's such a great spot for Benavides to be in, to get somebody that has that type of skill set. And as you can tell from this podcast, my favorite thing on defenses is the Canadian who has the ability to rotate from free safety to Sam, down into the box, create confusion, play physically, work on specials from day one. They have Marco Dubois, who's a special teams monster. Auclair is going to start alongside him as, again, two Laval guys. Shocking, they're great at special teams. But to be able to have Auclair and Dubois doing that on specials, he's going to earn himself defensive reps. And I don't know how you're going to take those away from Pruneau to put him on the field. But I do know that there's going to be some love for Auclair, where it's going to be really difficult for Pruneau to hold on to that job for much longer. And so I'd like to see them integrate a little bit of him just so that we can get a look, just a sense. And if he does get some snaps in a shortened preseason, I'm going to have my eyes hyper focused on what Adam Auclair is doing, because I think he's a hell of a player.
Shout out to Antoine Pruneau, who will be 32 when the Grey Cup rolls around. 32 was in 2019, we started throwing 32-year-olds off a cliff here in Saskatchewan. It was Manny Arsenault and Solomon Elamimian. Are these guys too old? Oh, actually, no, they're only 32.
Solly's only 32?
Solly was 32 in 2019.
Oh,
so,
God.
Yeah, we really push guys off a cliff too much. So apologies to Antoine Pruneau, who currently only 31 years old, and still, I wouldn't want to be anywhere near that guy on the football field. I might just die.
Yeah, he is. He flies around for sure. Let's move on to the
Love him.
last team here. It is Montreal for us, and I left this one open. I wanted to cede the floor to you because you got the depth charts up in front of you there, DT. And I just, in terms of my mind, when I think about the Alouettes defensively, obviously Enoch Mwamba is one of, if not the things that comes to mind. The way that they've invested, even through Kavis Reed's era there in the front office, in being able to accrue some defensive ends, in Nate Anderson out of Missouri, and they got Bo Banner, I think, from Washington State, wherever he was from out there in the Pacific Northwest. So to be able to get some of those guys in, I think the real strength of what they've done, honestly, is the receiver depth. I mean, they have prioritized in the second, third rounds over the last couple of years, getting great Canadians in at that receiver spot to be able to complement all the great American talent that they have at receiver. And so I look at this as, if I'm going to fix their defense, it probably has a lot more to do with the secondary, similar to Toronto, because of who you're playing against. But I'm wondering what you have there.
Montreal, to me, if you wanted to take all 9 teams and go, which team is most likely to regress from what they were in 2019?
Yeah.
It's Montreal, and then it's 50 feet of nothing, and then it's the other 8 teams. Montreal is going to, I just think they're going to collapse the season from what we thought was a team on the rise in 2019. Look at this defense. Nick Usher, Almondo Sewell. Love it. That's a great place to start. Who is with them? Again, the list of guys, I don't know who they are. Antonio Simmons is a name we know. Junior Luke, David Menard, I get it. Is Chris Aki going to start at that weak side linebacker spot? That's a guy with great flexibility. Question mark at middle linebacker. Patrick Levels at the Sam. Greg Reed will take one of the defensive back spots, and then you get into Money Hunter. Taekwon Glass has played Edmonton and I believe Montreal as well. Ryan Carter. Just too many questions in coverage for them. Just way too many questions from a team that had Tommy Campbell and Jonathan Mincy to just pure question marks. I don't know how they're getting to the quarterback if Nick Usher and Sewell don't get there, and I don't know who's covering anybody yet for the Montreal Alouettes. And then who's stopping? There are 7. I have at least 5 holes on this defense. I think they absolutely need to fill. So I think what I would wish and how I'd fix the Montreal Alouettes is another $500,000 on the salary cap so they could get at some of these holes. I'm confused. They better score 50 a game.
Well, and this is, I guess, the conundrum, and it's not necessarily a direct correlation, but Danny Machocha has prioritized being able to build up that French-Canadian talent, and I don't think that's taken away from what he's been able to do everywhere else, because he's done a great job of accruing talent on the offensive side, and unfortunately, they've had some early retirements across both sides of the ball. But when I think about the thing that he maybe could have really, truly just thrown money at, whether it be Enoch to just keep him in-house, because obviously they had a lot of interest in doing so, or if it's something else in the secondary where you go out and try to pick yourself up a stud. I mean, trying to think of some of the names that were out there early on in free agency where, let's say they hadn't signed back in, who you got picked up and would have been a real difference maker. I mean, they chipped away and they got a couple of pieces here. And Aki, I actually think is important. I think Aki's a really, really good player. Yeah. CFL experience, Canadian, gives you more flexibility, playmaker. Agreed. I mean, he's going to be that guy, I think, for them. But yeah, instead of that, getting back Patrick Levels is meaningful. There's no question about that. I think pretty highly of Greg Reed as well as a defensive back. But you start to look at it comparison-wise and stacking Ticats, Red Blacks, Argos, and Montreal in the East Division and the top 6 DBs that you have in their spots. And there's no question to me at this point that they are, I mean, probably one of the weakest. I would say that you've got kind of a competition there, depending on how you feel about the Sherrod Baltimores and Corey Tyndalls of the world, that maybe Ottawa would be close-ish, but there's just more questions with Montreal. There's no doubt about that.
And this is part of what I kind of I started to think about the 2020 draft, in that I would have really prioritized drafting young guys who were going to try the NFL for a little bit, and I would have passed on the older guys. They drafted Marc-Antoine Dequoy, which fits in with the want to get guys from Quebec. That dude turns 27 in season this year.
He's a stud. He is a stud, though, sure. Right? So but yeah, his longevity and building around that is difficult, because the SAGEP equation, where everybody that you're playing against that's out of the RSEQ, you know, you've got 18-year-olds from Ontario playing in national semifinal games against 26-year-olds with kids running around the field.
Well, and that's where I started to go, oh, the incredible athlete thing. Well, I get it, but 25 versus 21, where's that 21-year-old going to come in the next 4 years in building to where a kid who's 25 is? Like a 27-year-old rookie, just it scares me. And he may be fantastic, but his runway is to be fantastic from 27 to 31, not from 24. Cam Judge isn't. I don't think Cam Judge is as old as Marc-Antoine Dequoy, right? So that's what I didn't get. I would have, and I'm accountable to nobody, and I don't have to win any football games, but I would have been all over the kids like Carter O'Donnell, the young kids who, hey, I'm going to the States. Cool. We're not going to have a season in 2020, so we miss you for 1 year, one fewer year than we would have had to. I'm really curious to see that, but there's a guy who, I mean, if he is that kind of athlete, they have the option to play Canadian at one of their coverage spots, which that's great. Dominic Termanson is there as well. They have options, but they just need more talent.
Yep. There is a deficiency there, no doubt. All right, that is all 9 teams. Anybody else you want to fix? Anybody else you want to take a look around at, or?
Let's talk about the CFL front office and why my friend Christina Costable needs a giant raise. Let's talk about. You know what? Let's do that in the extended version.
Okay, good. Yeah, we'll save that for behind a paywall. That's where you can find that one. All right, that is Derek Taylor at DT on SC is where you can find him. Good stuff as always, man. It's great to be able to break this down. And again, next week we'll be taking a look at the offenses, and there will be a lot of receiver talk in that one. We'll come with some details on that, of course.
Yeah, I won't try to fix any running backs because just plop anybody else in there. Just plop. Go get Johnny Augustine from Winnipeg. That's your starter.
Hey, there you go. Love it. Golf guy. All right. All right. We got the offenses for you next week coming up. Looking forward to doing that. I am at TSN_Marsh. Coming up on Thursday's edition of All Canadian with Wade St. Keta and Connor O'Neill. They're going to be interviewing Justice Allen, running back from the McMaster Marauders. I promise you I did not hook up that interview. That has nothing to do with me. I messaged them the other day and said, what are you doing Thursday? I want to let people know and promote it. And they said, we're doing a little Mac guy interview there. So Justice Allen, who's a great player, he will be able to be in your ears coming up on Thursday morning. We thank you as always for listening to the breakdown here. It's brought to you, of course, by our friends at Fox 40, helping you return to play safely with their latest innovations, the Fox 40 Tri-Layer Whistle Mask and the Fox 40 Electronic Whistle. For 15% off all of your whistle needs, visit fox40shop.com and enter the code CFP15. We are saving you money, and it helps them know that you're actually listening, which is a good thing for all of us. Looking forward to bringing you the show once again next week. Thanks for tuning in. As always, follow along on cfperspective.com, and don't forget to follow us on Twitter and Instagram at CF Perspective. For now, have yourselves a great Wednesday.